We are about ready to start. We're now coming to our fourth and final armchair discussion, and our topic is supporting adaptive management and policy learning. We're going to show a short video to tee up this session, and then Robert will be moderating this fourth panel.
I think it's easy for folks that are not in our world to appreciate that there is a huge untapped potential in the African economy as far as agriculture is concerned. I think it's really easy to recognize that there must be some perverse incentives at work keeping the African agricultural economy from solving the continent's food and malnutrition challenges. It is not a lack of committed individuals and champions to solving whatever challenges they might face in their organization, but that these type of complex long-term problems, most of the time, the majority of the time, the solution isn't something that can be solved by a single department or a single organization.
When it comes to development, sometimes there is a lot of ambiguity in terms of you've not clearly defined and agreed on a problem, you've not created a common vision, and you've not created the structures for coordination, and you're not very clear on the results. So people keep cropping in the dark in the name of we are coordinating without that clarity.
Where the stakeholders, say for instance customs, the seed growers, the farmers, everybody, transporters, are brought together and they're able to address their concerns on one forum. Because if we're speaking the same language, don't you think it's easier for us to do business together than if we're speaking different languages?
Adaptive management is engaging in an approach or a process where you change your strategies based on the realities and perspectives coming from the field in the process of trying to get solutions to problems or engaging specific activities to realize the vision of a particular group of people.
Nous avons mis en place en fait des outils de travail collaboratif avec un dashboard, un tableau de bord, qui en fait chaque semaine est présenté au chef de l'État pour lui dire qu'est-ce qui marche pas, quels sont les problèmes qui méritent son intervention et quelles sont les propositions de solutions qu'on lui soumet pour pouvoir décider ou arbitrer. Et ça, ce tableau de bord, ce dashboard, on l'a fait avec le concours d'Africa Lead depuis la création du BOSS. Donc ça a été extrêmement utile, cet outil de travail collaboratif, parce que ça a permis aux opérationnels de pouvoir mettre à jour l'information et diffuser l'information pertinente sur leur projet, sur leur réforme. Et ça permet également aux décideurs d'avoir accès à cette information-là, pour l'instant pas en temps réel, mais à une fréquence hebdomadaire, et pour pouvoir piloter de façon très effective la dynamique de transformation économique du Sénégal.
Africa Lead a compris deux choses. Dans tout investissement qu'on doit faire, il faut investir en l'homme d'abord, l'humain, l'être humain. Et dans nos interventions, nous plaçons l'être humain au cœur de notre stratégie.
Can I invite the panelists to come up and be seated? Yeah. Okay, this is our last discussion today, but by no means least, it's an important topic on supporting adaptive management and policy learning. And the discussion will focus on some of the lessons we've learned from adaptive management practices, policy learning, including the CADAP biennial review process that Godfrey referred to earlier, and as well as other learning processes. You just heard from the video, for instance, the boss dashboard from Senegal. So very well, and it comes at this point because if you think about it, if you have good leadership, you have got a good collaborative process, you've got joint planning and joint implementation, at the end of the day, you need to learn. You need to improve over time. And therefore, supporting adaptive management and policy learning has been a big part of Africa Leads work at various levels. And we are really glad to have this panel with us. I'll introduce them now. Right next to me is Chris Shepard-Pratt, who is the USAID Bureau for Food Security Division, Chief of SHIP for Policy. Chris is going to be sharing with us some perspectives around this topic, especially from USAID's point of view. Next to Chris is Fatmata Seiwo. Fatmata is from ECOWAS. She is the ECOWAP and CADAP. I'm deliberately not going to say out what those mean because she's going to tell us more. She's the ECOWAP and CADAP program and monitoring and evaluation officer with the ECOWAS Commission. As I said, she's the M&D officer for both the CADAP program and the ECOWAP. And of course, as M&D officer, Fatmata has spent a lot of time thinking about these issues and will share with us her perspectives on the use of data, especially from the point of view of a regional economic community or regional intergovernmental organization. Thank you and welcome, Fatmata. Okay. Next to Fatmata is John Ulimwengu, who is from IFPRI. He's actually the RISAX coordinator. You're going to find out what RISAX is in a short while. And John has been involved in research and policy advisory work for CADAP for a while, and recently, with regard to the biennial review, RISAX has been quite instrumental in that process. And John will share with us some perspectives from where he sits. Next to John, if you could put your hand up. Yes. That's Edwin Odhiambo, who's my colleague at Africa Lead, and he's actually been leading the East Africa program. And Edwin has just finished, or is concluding a process of learning in East Africa with the seed system industry. It's very interesting, and we are going to hear more about what they are learning, what they are doing, and what they are learning. It's a different kind of learning process. The last one, at the very end, is Augustine Wamboyamju, who's the head of CADAP at AUDA NEPAD. AUDA is African Union Development Agency, based in Midrand in South Africa. It's part of the African Union, so he's a close colleague of Godfrey's. and has been working for a long time on agricultural development issues in Africa, including significantly on CADAP. And so we'll be happy to learn from him his perspectives on how, for example, the biennial review is going, as well as joint sector reviews and other insights. So this is a great panel, and once again, join me in 2 claps for them to welcome them. 1, 2. Thank you so much. I'll jump straight into it. I'll start with you, Chris, and ask you to kind of just introduce this topic in a way and share with us your thoughts about why this is important. Why should we be concerned about adaptive management and policy learning from where you sit?
Thank you. If I may, I just want to diverge at the front end of this conversation to say, first, what a pleasure it is to be here. And second, this counter-narrative that is represented in Africa Lead, and the fact that we're talking about helping promote leadership across a continent that's inclusive, that brings people together to solve problems together, is such a wonderful counter-narrative to what we probably generally would hear in the media, what we might hear about what Africa needs, and it's so timely because it comes at a moment when USAID, 60 years after its inception roughly, has come back to the idea that country ownership, country-owned solutions are the only sustainable way forward. And so, I want to give a nod to Jeff Hill and to Courtney Buck for the role that they've played in establishing this program. The foresight that they had, 4 years ago, or now 7 years ago, thinking we want to put this in place and we want to showcase African leadership as the way forward. Couldn't have been more prescient. So thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Courtney. And for those of you who may not know, Jeff's retiring on Friday from USAID after a long and illustrious career. And I can't think of a better example of a civil servant who has dedicated his career to improving the welfare, the well-being, and the capacity of people to lead themselves into a better future. So thank you, Jeff. So, I'm not sure I'm going to introduce this topic any better than you already have, but I'll give it a go. So, USAID is really interested at this point in this concept of a journey to self-reliance, where we're talking about the commitment and the capacity of countries to take their development agenda forward on their own. And on some level, it's a little bit insulting for us to put that on the table because, in truth, African countries around the world have been doing this for a long time. What's maybe important and useful is that USAID is finally coming to the realization that it's in our interest and we're going to be far more effective when and where we are leaning in and supporting countries in doing this. But in talking about this idea of adaptive learning, adaptive management, if you think about any organization in the world that you regard as highly successful, and the values and the approach, the practices of that organization, I would be hard-pressed to point to any organization that doesn't intentionally learn from what it's doing and try to take those lessons into the future and adapt to be a better organization. And essentially, when we're talking about policy systems, I think we're talking about the same thing. We're talking about an approach that starts by producing conclusive evidence for decision-making. And I think all those words in that sentence are important. Conclusive evidence for decision-making. We find that my experience at USAID has been that often we don't actually always collect evidence for decision-making. We collect lots of information, we collect lots of data, but it's not always useful or intended for decision making. Internalizing that, so having a process of considering it across a lot of different stakeholders with different views and perspectives, and then taking action. But the important part that we are often missing is a feedback loop that says, all right, we started down this pathway, how are we doing? We had a bunch of assumptions. We had what we thought were some viable vehicles. How are they performing? Reflecting on that and going back to the beginning and repeating the process. And what's really encouraging for the biennial review and some of the other processes we're seeing in CADP right now is we're seeing this type of approach embodied in a continent-wide agenda. And it's really encouraging. One, it says that accountability is important. And we believe it certainly is. And two, it says that there's a willingness to change and learn. And all those things are important. But I think as important as those things, maybe part of the puzzle that's missing at the moment is this concept of communication. So the beginning of today, we heard a bit about facilitative leadership and some other concepts, and we heard about the importance of bringing people into decision making. The conversation didn't go, I think, very far in talking about the importance of making sure that the data, the evidence, the lessons, the conversations are easily understood by all of the parties that are participating. I think it's a point that was raised, but I want to kind of emphasize it because we know at USA that one of the most important things for us to do going forward is to really lean into this concept of communication. So amongst the things that we're doing is to say, when we are collecting evidence, when we're designing our results framework, we want to bring our communicators into that process. We want them involved from the very beginning so that at the end of the process, when we're talking about what has been achieved, it makes sense, right? Good scientists are not always great communicators, believe it or not. Great communicators don't always understand the nuance of science and technology and the information that's there. It is absolutely essential that we are bringing these people together and that we're actually investing in the communication platforms that are going to push this stuff out. I've gotten a little bit off topic, but I wanted to be a little bit provocative at the front end of this and say there are probably some things that we could do better and differently. They're going to take us farther and faster because at the end of the day, a movement, a political movement, whether it's for the transformation of African agriculture or it's to improve the human rights and the role of women in society, communication has to be an essential part of that. You can have the best vision in the world, you can have the best plan in the world, but if you're not communicating it to all the people that you need to move that agenda, you probably don't have much and you're probably not going to get very far. Okay. So I would encourage us in the biennial review and these other parts of the policy agenda to really start to invest probably a bit more in that part of the picture.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your thoughts, Chris. It's very nice. And I mean, we are lucky to have a researcher sitting right in the middle of the panel. So a little later on, I'm going to get to him to see whether he agrees with you that researchers could perhaps communicate a little better. But all your other points as well were quite on point and useful as a starting point. But I want to skip now and go to the end with Augustine, because we've got this process in Africa that I think Godfrey had started to talk about, and also we heard from Maura in the morning, the biennial review process, as it's called. First, what exactly is this? What is it meant to achieve? And can you start to tell us some of the early outcomes and lessons that you see from that process?
Thank you, Robert. I would like first to thank Africa Lead for the opportunity and also to congratulate Jeff and thank you for the support that we've received so far. You remember I met you some 15 years ago, October 2004. when we started engaging on translating the Maputo Declaration into some concrete actions on the ground. You've been part of us all along, so we are so grateful. Now, going back to what the biennial review is, I think it's probably good for me to put it in proper context. Back in 2014, African head of states during their assembly adopted an important declaration, the Malabo Declaration in Equatorial Guinea, that encapsulates the new vision that the continent has for agricultural transformation. That declaration has 7 key commitments. Commitment number 7 is about head of states setting themselves up, let me put it like that, for review every 2 years on how they are performing against the goals that they have set in transforming the agriculture. So soon after the adoption of the declaration, we started working with African Union institutions, REX, and development partners, including Africa Lead, in coming up with a system that would allow us to be able to track the progress that is being made on the ground. So we needed first to agree on what are we tracking, the indicators that we should be tracking, the key resource areas that we should be investigating in, and so on and so forth. And how do we do it? The how became very important. So at the beginning, let's say, we didn't really know for something that is a continental-wide undertaking. It was really a big challenge. So we needed to agree on who to train, how to train people. Africa Lead supported that process to a certain extent, as earlier mentioned by someone. And we eventually came up with a set of indicators, which were agreed upon by all the key players, including the countries, the regional economic communities, and so on and so forth, and the non-state actors. They played an important role. So ours was to facilitate all these, bringing together all the key constituencies for them to make their input into the biennial review process. So we came up with a set of 43 indicators. We administered the exercise across the continent. We got countries submitting their information, their scores, and then we had a picture of how the continent was performing against the key targets that are captured in the Malabo Declaration. So we are happy today to say that it started as something that looked very impossible until it was done. It didn't happen on its own. It was a collective effort. We joined plan, we faced challenges together, we agree on how to improve. So in January 2018, the first ever report on how African countries were driving the transformation agenda on the continent was released. So the picture that we saw was not that encouraging. Only less than half of the African countries were on track towards meeting the 2025 target. We learned a lot from that process. One thing that we learned is also that the countries, contrary to the initial ideas that some of us had, the countries got very excited about the notion of being reviewed every 2 years. Thanks to the advocacy work that folks like civil society, as mentioned by Constance before, did, countries got very close to the process. They were very excited about embarking on it, despite the challenges of having quality data to be able to inform the real picture on the ground. In the end, what we have is almost all countries lining up for review, but for the reasons that are not necessarily what we would like to see. Countries are pushing to be reviewed, probably for them to look good, that they are doing well. But they are not that preoccupied Now that we release the first report, quite a few requests that we are receiving are about how do you help us to score better in the next review. Instead of us helping them to better plan and to implement for results and impact, they are more concerned about improving their scores, which is another conversation that we are having with them at the moment, which is very exciting. The other thing that we also saw is that there are quite a few challenges that are faced by countries. But besides saying that we don't trust the quality of data because data is not consistent, you cannot use it, and when you put garbage in, you get garbage out, countries themselves are appreciating the need for them to ensure that they have data that is properly curated. Quality is becoming important. They are also striving. They are saying that they would like to invest more in getting the system that will help them to improve the quality of data that they have to be able to report accurately on what is happening on the ground. One thing that we also realized after conducting the first biennial review was that the process was very difficult. We agreed at some point to pause a bit, take one step back, and reflect on the overall process. And we documented a few lessons, including those that I've mentioned. But one thing that is also quite intriguing to quite a few of us is that there is a big danger in sustaining the hype around the biennial review, making it a lot easier for the partners to only push for the biennial review, forgetting the core business, where the transformation should happen. The engine where donors have to put their support to get concrete actions on the ground that will in turn materialize into improved scores. So if you are not careful, we might be making it easier for people to run away for what they stand for. Because when they come to the countries, they say they want to support the countries. But in actual fact, if one is not careful, the whole conversation might revolve around accountability. We believe that the advocacy that we started embarking on back in January 2018 is beginning to pay off. Donors are now appreciating the message that we have been trying to get across. That yes, the biennial review is an important step moving forward, but let's make sure that we don't drop the ball. Let's keep our eye on what matters the most. Okay. Let's get people to improve on how they implement, how they plan.
Yeah, that's a good note for me to come in, Augustine. Let's keep the eye on the ball. You gave a very interesting example of, this is kind of like the way you grade people in class. Everyone gets a report, the only difference being we share the reports and we see who's doing well, who's not, and we use that peer mechanism to try and encourage each other. But as you mentioned, of course, there's a perverse incentive where now it's about how can I get the process to give me better grades rather than how can I study harder or do the right things in order to get better grades. I like that insight. Thanks so much. And I think I'll come back to you later on maybe on this topic if we have time. But I'd like to bring John in because John's also been part of this process, albeit from a different standpoint, coordinating research, which has been supporting this process and other processes, including the joint sector reviews, which is also in and of itself a learning and adaptive management process. And John, what do you see? I mean, let's start with what you are learning at a macro level. I mean, you work in all of Africa, you see all these countries. Are there some, if you could share very briefly some overall big picture lessons and potentially also a challenge or two that you see emerging from the whole process?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you, Africa Lead, for having me here I would also join my good friend Augustine to thank Jeff, because some of us are in this business because of Jeff's leadership. We started this 13 years ago. RESACS stands for Regional Strategic Analysis and Knowledge Support System. So if you call yourself RESACS, I guess your business is to support evidence-based policy making by providing database. There is no adaptive management without measuring, and there is no measuring without data. So one of our core business is really to build data to support the implementation of the CADEP and Malabo process as described by Augustine. But in addition to build databases, we also develop analytical tools. We call ourselves the custodians of the M&E framework for the CADEP and Malabo agenda. We do that to assess progress, benchmarking, and peer learning as well. At country level, the process really starts with a political stage. We call it Malabo domestication, that is led by African Union and NEPAD Development Agency. But then starts the typical RESACS work that we do by taking stock of where the countries stand with respect to Malabo commitment. This is very important because we, by supporting and promoting the evidence-based policy making, we want to make sure that we use Malabo commitment as reference. So that's the starting point. Just to answer a very basic question, where does the country stand? And then after that stage, we move into doing long-term strategic analysis for key goals in terms of poverty reduction, income, employment, food security, and so forth. And then we put that into the hands of the country team, basically telling them this is your business as usual trend. If you proceed with this trend, this is where you will get, but these are alternative scenarios, something that you can do differently in terms of adaptive management. So the country will use both the stock-taking analysis and the long-trend strategic analysis to design the policies and national agriculture investment plans. When they are done, they will come back to African Union for an independent review. So there is another stage where we want to make sure that there is consistency between what the country is planning to do and what the evidence are showing. And then goes the implementation. But after every year, at the end of the year, we publish the M&E framework for the whole continent, and then there are lessons learned. And those lessons learned M&E are then fed into the joint sector review that it bring all the stakeholders, the review, and then it loops back to again, stock taking and so forth. So it's not a static process. It's a dynamic process that feeds itself using evidence. It's some countries, I think across the continent, more and more countries are using this process. I think in Rwanda, it's even done twice a year. So it's a way of making sure that the country is heading to the right direction. I just wanted to highlight something here that for the last 5 years or so, we noticed that we needed to go beyond national level. So we start building these sub-national, we call them e-atlases, databases, and something interesting happened since last year. We're using Ghana, Rwanda, Kenya, and Burkina Faso as pilots. We are now doing analysis at sub-national level, this time to support civil society organizations, to put in their hands enough evidence to do their advocacy work, so that it's the whole process, it's becoming demand-driven. It's not seen as coming from AUC, but at least in these countries, we need to trigger that at local level. But one thing that you mentioned challenge is that most of the time they don't have the right appropriate materials to support the advocacy work. And as we speak, there are 5 to 6 ECOWAS countries in Senegal coming together to use the sub-national data and to do their own analysis to be able to support that advocacy and learning processes, because issues like poverty, like food security, are different when you look at a country like Nigeria. National averages make less sense because in the north you might have completely different picture. The issues are different than in the south and so forth. So that's really the new wave. And one last thing, we've been collecting since this year all the policy changes across Africa. And hopefully next month in Lomé, we will share the first result of that. So what is happening in terms of policy changes? And what is triggering, driving those policy changes?
Yeah. I mean, you didn't touch on it, but clearly, research is not typical of the research, the normal research, because you're actually doing a lot of communication. But thanks so much for sharing with us those insights, particularly this idea that a lot of learning can also happen at subnational level. Even the biennial review can be taken to small organizations in villages. There is a sense that has existed in a lot of spaces where people say, hey, this is too complex. The women and youth and others in the villages cannot understand the data. But we at Africa Lead actually had a project, small grants project, that showed that if presented in the right way and discussed in the right language, the best interpreters and analysts of data are the people in the villages, the farmers. They understand what's going on and they can tell you what the data is saying better than you can do with the fancy models in an international agricultural research institute. Okay, so thanks for those. I want to come to Fatoumata, who, as I mentioned, is from ECOWAS. And so far, we have discussed this whole system, continental system, that comes all the way from AU down to subnational level, as both John and Augustine have described. But we haven't touched on the role of regional economic communities. Do they have a role to play in this system? And what's that role? Are they facing any challenges? Do they have the capacity to play the role? What are some of your thoughts on this, if you can share with us briefly? Fatoumata.
You know why everybody's laughing?
No, I didn't hear anyone laugh.
My question is double barrel. Okay, thank you very much, Robert. Thank you, Africa Lead, for this opportunity. Quite honestly, before I respond to my question, if you could permit me, I want to take this opportunity to ask Jeff a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Which he might respond to during the cocktail. Chris mentioned that he will retire on Friday from USAID. I wanted to find out whether he's going to retire from Africa. All right. So. Okay.
So he can tell us during the reception.
Cocktail,
okay.
Yes.
All right.
So yes, so again, to respond to your first question, ECOWAP is the ECOWAS Agriculture Policy, and CADEP, we all know, is the Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program. It's deliberate that it's ECOWAP CADEP because we want to be clear that it's sync. together. ECOWAP is a baby of CADEP, and there's no way we can talk about ECOWAP without CADEP. So that's the simple reason why it's like that. As REX, clearly we have a role in the entire process and system that have been described. So we have a traditional role, which is coordination. When I was listening to the video last night, and I said to myself, why did Edwin make that statement? He says, we are coordinating. What does it mean? You know, because sometimes we say, yes, I'm coordinating, and what does it mean? Is it just saying I'm coordinating and you're not really doing what you're supposed to do? So as REX and as ECOWAS, because I'm representing all the REX here, our traditional role is coordination. So we are simply a conduit between African Union and the member states. And that role cannot change even when we're talking about policy learning or adaptive management, because it still requires us to get our member states better organized. It also helps to make roles and responsibilities quite clear, because it's sometimes overburdening for African Union to go straight to the countries. And as REX, we have a special touch with our member states, so that if it's not direct dealing with the member states directly, I bet you there will be a challenge, particularly in ECOWAS. It's quite easier because they signed agreements at the regional level, so that when information is transmitted through the REC, it makes responses very rapid and very clear. So we have a key role in coordination, in bringing them together. And if I want to bring it to this context with regards to the BR, for example, I know vividly that in terms of the entire data process, it has been quite smooth when we get information from African Union and we transmit to our member states, and then it goes back the other way. So the feedback loop, which is very critical in policy learning and adaptive management, is a role that the REX can play. Clearly, we have capacity to some extent, because we're still learning and we still have room for improvement. We have capacity because we already have institutional systems. So for ECOWAS, for example, the common administrative processes, we have institutionalized staff members, human resources. So we don't have that rapid turnover. So we have institutional memory, which is very strong, and you have key people playing a role for over as many years as you could imagine. And then we already have existing systems. So when we're talking about RISACs, John mentioned RISACs. RISACs is at all the different RECs. So even when it is at the continental level, it is at the regional level to make the process quite easier. So if we want to do analysis, we don't need to go straight to RISACs continental. We just deal with our counterparts at the regional level. So we have existing structures and systems that we're using, which makes us have the capacity. Between the first and second BR, we had an interesting scenario where immediately after the report was ready, ECOWAS and RISACs West Africa developed a BR regional brief, which we used for several engagements with our parliamentarians, with our stakeholders, our non-state actors, even when we went to member states, because we thought that we could further sensitize the member states. There is this gap between technicians and politicians, especially at country level. So we decided to use some of the information we translated from the BR report, RISACs, ECOWAS, and we went down to a few countries where there were challenges for the first BR. I give you a typical example. We went to Guinea-Bissau, and we went to as far as the Prime Minister's office. So we had technical sessions with the technicians, and we took the technicians to the Prime Minister's office. We sat together and looked at their scorecard. So it triggered action. We did the same for several countries, and we also used the technical network that African Union had established. So we took some of those experts. For example, Liberia, we knew had a key challenge, and we sent a technical expert for a full month to help them prepare for the second BR. So we have the capacity to some extent, the challenges notwithstanding. And I think one of the things we can quickly do to help improve the process is, we are now talking about EBR. Do we want, together with Africa Lead, talk about e-learning? so that the information that is processed, we can make available to everyone probably at the same time, because now we are doing manual learning.
Yeah.
We go country by country, do sensitization.
Yeah.
So yes, we have the capacity. Our roles are traditional, but we still can take on board new roles. We want to consider the possibility of engaging more with our non-state actors. We have CADEP Non-State Actors Coalition, but it's not reflected at the regional level. There's a gap, there's a missing link. So how do we bring that missing link? How do we merge the two so that the process flows smoothly?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fatoumata. I'm glad you mentioned e-learning, because I know you've been involved in one of our webinars where we say, okay, initially lots of people say, it's too hard, we don't have internet in Africa everywhere, how are we going to get onto this stuff? Don't force it. We only insisted and people got onto webinars and start to engage. We don't have to come to a meeting like this. It's really expensive to get everyone in a room, but we can discuss over an hour during a webinar some interesting topics, and I think it's picking up. It's a very interesting way to deepen learning, and I think now we are getting folks saying, can you teach us how to download and use these tools and so on? And I really like that, because it's going to save us a lot of trouble getting people into meetings all the time. Thanks for sharing that, and also the other thoughts you have around the role that RECs can play in this system. So far we've been talking about largely the continental learning process, but also saying that the learning has to be at subnational level. That's real learning. It goes all the way to presidents sitting and looking at their scorecards and saying who's performed better and ordering changes. This is what we want to see, and I think we are slowly getting there, if these reports we are getting are to be believed. But learning, adaptive management and policy learning can happen in other sectors and other spheres, and a slightly different context is what Edwin has been doing, which is also relevant, working with the seed industry. And Edwin, I'll just give you a few minutes to also tell us about the exercise that you are leading and what you are learning about learning.
Thank you, Robert. As you said, I'm going to talk about a pilot seed activity that Africa Lead supported. It's still continuing, and it has happened for a few months, but have generated a lot of lessons for us. So 2 aspects of this in terms of adaptive management and policy learning. One is about how we learned or changed as a project in terms of how we were implementing the activity. And 2 is how we also applied the same concept with the partners that we were, or stakeholders that we were working with. I'm going to use the word we, but as a caveat, it just shows the level of passion that we have in this, but not that we were doing it ourselves, but the processes that we were facilitating towards that. So we have supported the seed policy harmonization, regional seed policy harmonization, specifically COMESA seed policy harmonization for some time. And when we started, we focused on convening regional dialogues and annual review meetings for purposes of reviewing how the policy was being implemented at country level, specifically how they were implementing the action plan that the stakeholders agreed on at the regional level. The other thing that we focused on was building the organizational capacity of the REC itself to be able to do that. But after some time, we realized that what we are doing is really not translating to the actual seed movement between the countries. And there are also still limitations in terms of the actual implementation or domestication of the policy at the country level. So we had to come back and reflect and had some discussion with the USAID East Africa. And we agreed that we need to change our strategy and focus more on the country level. And before that, we did some study that generated a lot of insight about why the seed was not moving. And that informed how we designed the next steps or the pilot seed activity. So that's an aspect of using evidence and also learning from what we were doing. So for us to design the pilot activity, we brought together different actors, development agencies, seed companies, traders association, and had some discussions and worked with them to design this activity and come up with an action plan, and then got into the implementation. And just to highlight some of the important approaches or tools that we used was that we formed what we call an activity implementation task team that composed of different actors, including the seed companies, as part of this implementation team, designing, implementing, and reviewing. And that has really helped the project, the activity in terms of they are able to provide more information. They are able to tell you this will work or this will not work, so validating the process. The other thing is that activity also was geared towards addressing the challenge that we identified in terms of the top leadership commitment and the top leadership not being able to allocate resources to implement the policy at country level. And we identified the ministers and permanent secretaries as people who are very key to this process, and also the directors. So we worked with the country teams to do some analysis and identify certain key issues or systemic constraints that were constraining seed trade. And we had meetings, we facilitated meeting with the ministers and the PS, and that in a way elevated the seed issues at the country level. And through that process, we had some commitments and action plans that came out of that. The other thing is that we also had a learning visit, and through that process, we had some deal making. And you would find a situation where different countries were engaging in a kind of a business-to-business discussion to address challenges between them. So those were just a few approaches, but the approach that we used emphasized a lot on evidence. When we were starting, we had a problem of the data. We could not even get data to indicate how much seed trade is taking place across the countries. But as we were implementing, we realized that it's not more about the data, but how you use the little information that you have or evidence that you have. And for example, when we went to the border during the visit, prior to that, we had a smaller seed company try to cross the border with some small quantity of seed, and enumerating or documenting those challenges, and then sharing with the multi-stakeholder those challenges. We had seed companies also coming in with the information that they've compiled about the difficulties of crossing the border. And we also had customs officials giving us the data. So we used data from different groups of people, and that was enough to inform the discussions and the decisions that we wanted to do. So these were different ways of, or creative ways of generating evidence to inform the process. There were also different ways of learning and identifying gaps and coming up with solutions. We used learning visit between countries so that those countries where their seed standards are low would compare and learn from those that their standards are high. And the other important thing is that we could come up with immediate solutions and get different actors to be able to implement. In the interest of time, there's also the element of, because we brought different actors together, you could leverage from different programs. that were either at country level or at regional level. And we had partners saying, hey, I can do this, I can support this. And that was good because it enabled us to address certain needs and actions that needed to be taken.
Okay.
More important is that we realize that the seed companies, or rather the private sector, are actually willing to lead the process, to drive the process, only if we can demonstrate value. And if I had time, I would enumerate a number of examples where the seed companies have actually come in to organize us to do certain activities that could not happen before we started this process. For example, we had Bayer coming in to organize a training of seed inspectors in Tanzania, and they were coordinating us, the development agencies. Thank you.
I totally enjoy your passion, Edwin. I know that if you had time, you could easily talk about this process for a long time. An example of if you have a problematic industry on an issue or an issue that you need to resolve somewhere, you can also organize learning around that specific problem, that industry, that area, using some of the techniques and methods that Edwin is sharing with us, and sort out the issues. That's part of adaptive learning. There may be not a process of learning in that space, but as an external facilitator or an interested agent, you can actually go in and run a process. So as Edwin hinted, and he's actually right, there are two forces that I find very difficult to go against. One of them is gravity and the other one is time. And it seems that time is winning. We don't have enough time to go into a lot more discussion, but I'd like to see if there's any question for this panel from any of you before I come back to them to try and close down the conversation. The adaptive learning, as you're all thinking of, if you do have a question, there's some, I'd say, sayings. Only a fool cannot change their mind. And adaptive learning suggests that you should be prepared to change your mind. You should be vulnerable. Just summarizing from some of the points I'm hearing, countries need to accept that they can be doing poorly if they want to learn, and some of them are resisting. If you don't learn from your mistakes, you are destined. In fact, let me not say destined. You are condemned to repeat them. I didn't say these words. They're actually existing proverbs. So it's really basic logic. I want to finish with the panel, and I didn't look too carefully to see if there is any, let me see. Oh, 3. So I'll start from that end. Make them real quick, rapid fire. The principle is KISS, keep it short and sweet. You start, Ernest. It's on? Yes, it's on.
It is on. Okay, thank you. My question is for everyone. I think we are now on the second phase of the BR.
Mm-hmm.
So we have done the first BR. There are many lessons. We are now on the second BR.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see the reflection on how really we can use efficiently the lessons of this report. I think this is very important because at country level, people are just are running to submit their reports, but there is no clear strategy on how the data can be actually used to inform implementation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Very good question. There was a second hand. I think it's Yoka.
Thank you. My question is for Chris. You mentioned the importance of using data and evidence and research, not only just to influence, do policy analysis and influence the policy agenda, but to also just reflect and learn and change our strategies. I think that's very easy for governments to do, or perceived governments to be able to do that, but how as non-state actors can we take up that same culture of using data to change our strategies?
Thank you. Very good question. I think yes, Courtney.
question is maybe to anyone on the panel or possibly to Ernest, but is just for some reflections on the interface between learning and accountability. Because it does seem that there's a space where one has to give way to the other, and how do we not push too far in either direction?
Aha, very interesting, very nice questions. Okay, how about we start with the last one, the interface between learning and accountability. So I don't have much time, but anyone that wants to respond, I'll give them 15 to 20 seconds, so you've got to really be fast in your response. Ernest, you are not part of the panel, but we are going to co-opt you. So start thinking about a response. And even as we are thinking, Chris, if you want to respond to this question from Yuka about it's the ease with which government might use data, but not necessarily non-state actors. And by the way, for me, data is not just the figures that I see, researchers love. It could be emotions, feelings, attitudes, opinions, and that's hard to come by. Just throwing that into the mix. But anyway, your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, maybe a couple of things. The first is that Jeff alluded earlier to the institutional architecture indicator that we have and the workshops that Africa Lead has led that help partners across the policy spectrum to reflect on policy choices and impediments along the pathway for decision making, and why implementing might not be happening as quickly or as fast as one would like. And I think that civil society has an important role to play in even that process, and reflecting on where the system is able to deliver and where it's not able to deliver, but also the feedback loops that say, there was a hypothesis about how this policy was going to impact people, and it was predicated on government investing here or private sector investing here, but it was also predicated on civil society reflecting on and advocating for how that policy was affecting people. And so each of these actors has a role to play. And so I would say a process like that, where you're reflecting on how you are adding value to this whole policy system and process, is an important one, and can and should dramatically, perhaps in some cases, alter how you're thinking about things. And then just really quickly, someone mentioned it, I think it was John, the importance of bringing civil society into information in ways that they can understand and internalize it for their own decision making, so that we're changing perhaps understandings of problems or perceptions of solutions. Really important, and also could impact how civil society approaches things.
Okay. Anyone want to comment on any of the questions? I will go in this fashion, starting with you, Fatoumata.
The question that Alice raised about how
efficient use of the
BR. So for ECOWAS, I think from the first BR, we have tried to use as much information as possible. I'll give you typical examples. Right now, ECOWAS is on a regional joint sector review that was initiated by USAID since 2015. And I just recall that 2 days ago, we were going through the chapters because we are using the same process mechanism at the country level. Okay. We are not reinventing any wheel. So for a few of the chapters, we are referring back to the BR data that we have. And I know that the current commissioner we have insists that we present that to other sectors of ECOWAS, so inter-ECOWAS, so that those sectors related to agriculture also know their key roles. So we want to use that as well to let them know that they have a role to play in the process, so that we were able to not only improve on our scores, but to also ensure that everybody knows their roles and play it very well. Okay. So we're making quite effective use. But I think we need to think deeply about the entire process from the continental level to see how Rex first we take the responsibility of ensuring that it's not only about consolidating country data, but thinking about how we can better use it and begin to instill that in the minds of the countries.
Okay. So there is a lot of work still to be done also at country level so that policies can be changed, programs can be developed in response to what the data is saying and as the data comes out. Thanks, Fatmata John.
Yes, back I think it was early this year when we had a meeting in Addis, I suggest that with respect to the BR, every country, we helped draft the regional brief, so highlighting, key lessons for the regions, but we needed to go down to countries, and we did help some countries to come up with this brief. Why? Because we wanted this to be part of a special joint sector review around the lessons from the BR process. This is very important because the joint sector review is the only platform that includes all stakeholders. That's one. Second, we needed to expand beyond the Ministry of Agriculture. Often, the BR and the OCADEP Malabo process is seen as the Ministry of Agriculture project. We need to go beyond that. We even suggested to the participant draft a technical notes for the Prime Minister on the key lessons from the BR. Draft a note for the President Office. Draft a note for the Parliament and the key committees so that they are aware of what is happening.
Okay, thank you very much, John. There was one question on the interface between the learning and the accountability, and do we need to swing from one to the other and be careful about it, or can they coexist? Any thoughts from anyone? Quick one from you, Edwin, 30 seconds from Augustine, because you're on my panel. I'll decide whether we have time for you, Ernest. Start, Edwin.
Yeah, just a quick one on the interface between learning and accountability. It's a hard question to determine the exact level of incentive that would enhance accountability. But the way I would attempt this is what I've realized that it's not more about the structures and like having a mutual accountability framework, but more focus on the human aspect of this in terms of building confidence, building trust, and the relationships in a way that once you bring people on the table and they are comfortable with each other, they will start developing that inner accountability between themselves, rather than just focusing on developing certain deliverables and saying so and so will be responsible for this. So sometimes it's not about what is defined in terms of deliverables, but the relationships that you build that would enhance that accountability. And it takes time. It takes time because you keep building on different levels of incentive.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Augustine?
Yes, thank you. If we think of agricultural transformation as something that has several engines, one of which being accountability, then you look at learning as a fuel for that particular engine.
Yeah.
We are not in a either-or situation. One is very important. They're mutually important, because if you want the accountability system to work properly, you have to put in the correct fuel. The fuel is a learning. If you run the first BR, you are given the picture. You don't want to accept what the picture is showing you. You are looking somewhere else instead of facing the issue. Meaning you have to learn from what the picture is telling you and see how you improve on how you are doing business.
Thank you.
So in my view, we don't have really there's no confusion there.
Yeah.
And there's no way you can have a sense at some point that you have pushed too far on one side or the next. Yes.
So it's probably a false dichotomy in your view, like it's not, okay. I don't know if you still want to make a comment, Ernest. Okay, all right, okay. So yeah, I think it's an important, interesting point. Accountability sometimes I would think is like the bean counting part. Sometimes we call M&D people bean counters, some special ones who want to check, oh, how many trainings did you do? Ticking some boxes. It's important to see how resources were used and so on, but it's dry. So you need learning. What have we learned? How do we change, etc.? And getting that balance right, we have to think about whether it's either or, it's a mix of the two. So it's a thought-provoking question. Thanks for bringing it up, Courtney. Okay, I'm severely over time, and I apologize for that, Helen. But we've come to the end. Each of these topics could have easily taken a whole day, maybe a whole week, discussing and unpacking. But I hope that we have managed to, in this last session, scratch at least the surface and let you in on some of the happenings and the processes that we've been involved in supporting in Africa. So again, join me in thanking this group of panelists for their thoughts and participation. Let's give them two. Give again. Okay, I think Fatmata is suggesting a slight change in the giving. When you give something, they're supposed to receive, right? So when you receive, do that.
Yes.
So let's give them once more. Give. Okay, they receive. Thank you. With that, I will hand over back to you.
Okay,
I was worried about time. Okay.
No, it was good. It's perfect even. Thank you to the last panel and to Robert for your expert moderation. We have now completed all 4 of today's panels, and we're coming to the time when we'd like to invite a very special person up to the front to give closing remarks. Courtney, that's you. Courtney, as you heard from Chris, together with Jeff, was behind the design of Africa Lead 1 and 2, and has really been not only a champion for this work, but also a partner in it. We're very thankful to you for that partnership and very excited that, of course, you're here with us today.
Thanks, Helen. I'm not going to take very long, so I think we could talk about this during a reception. But I think that part of today was really about learning how to work together and learning how to work together better. And I think from where I sit, at least, sometimes a barrier to learning how to do that with different groups is being overly cautious about what ideas we have about what we might ask for from each other. That doesn't mean that we get what we want, but it at least helps us learn where each other are coming from and maybe helps us reflect ourselves on what we have to offer, what changes we're willing to make ourselves. And so in that spirit, I want to just kind of put 2 asks on the table and be a little bit more forthright and put myself out there with some asks. The first is related to the new program that was referenced this morning, the Policy Link program. We're just starting to roll this program out. It has a 6-month refine and implement stage, the purpose of which is to do consultations with our missions and with other partners to really refine what we should be achieving under this program. In the course of that, we want to hear from you. So the ask will be to tell us your ideas on what you think should be the priorities, what we should really be aiming to try to achieve with this program. And know that that also means we might come back to you to help us achieve those things. So that's the first ask. You know, if you receive an email asking for your ideas or if you put it on a sticky note, we'd appreciate that. And the second is something that Godfrey mentioned this morning, the idea of a tracer study to try to somehow track down all these champions. USAID did actually have a design for a scope of work that should have helped do this, that was not completed for a number of reasons. But if we were able to pick this back up again, which I really hope we could do, we would, the next ask would be, we would be really looking to the champions, including those in the room, to help us in tracking down the other champions, because that cascading is such that that's one of the main reasons we don't actually know how many people were reached, because it was done in some cases in communities. It wasn't a part of a bean counting process. So to do that tracer study, we would also be asking for some help from some of the champions. That's it.
Thank you, Courtney. And lastly, the last word goes to our chief of party, our in-house leader, Steve. And please do not run away after his invitation, which will be a very good invitation, but there are a few announcements after he finishes.
Thank you. So, have you heard enough about learning today? How about just, good, thank you, Kathy. I appreciate that, because I have one last point about learning to make. But first, I just want to say that this is called a learning series. It's been part of Africa Lead's a series of events. I don't know exactly how many we've had, Shannon, maybe 22 events starting about 4 months ago, webinars, events in Senegal, events in Kenya, mainly webinars, actually. This event here. There'll be 2 events tomorrow. I don't know how many of you know about those. There'll be one in the morning on resilience, and there'll be one in the afternoon on institutional architecture. So if some of you are interested in those events, they'll be at the Grand Hyatt, which is about 4 blocks from here. I know that many of us are there for the night. And so who would they talk to if they wanted to, if they were interested in that? Who? Shannon? Shannon? Everyone knows Shannon by now? Okay. So yeah, this is part of our learning series, this event. It's not by chance that we call it a learning series, because learning for us has been, by when I say us, hopefully it's everybody in the room, but for Africa Lead, has been a starting point and an ending point. We are ending the program now, and we are still learning and very committed to it. About 5 years ago, when I went out to East Africa as the regional director for Africa Lead out there, we established our principal goals, our main goals for our office out there for Africa Lead. And guess what the number 1 goal was? This was 5 years ago. Learning. That was the number 1 goal. Because we felt that if an organization and its people create learning culture and practices, that all else falls in place, including technical performance. The good habits and teamwork that come out of a really committed learning process really, really do lead to everything good. In fact, I would also, and I think some of the people already said this up here, Courtney, I would definitely say that learning and accountability, a true committed learning, it's not just about taking in information, it's about acting on that information, and that leads directly to accountability. So I think they definitely are mutually reinforcing. And if we hope to support the external practices with these approaches that we've talked about, the approaches and tools that we've talked about today in these 4 sessions, we really need to start at home. And that would be my main point that I would like to leave everybody with. I think learning starts at home. And for Africa Lead, it really has been about learning internally first. We've had all kinds of internal management and leadership training. We practice teamwork. We provide each other with feedback. It hasn't been perfect, but I think it's improved. And so that is our commitment on Link, to take that to a higher level and continue that, that culture and that commitment to learning. So that for me has been really lesson number 1. It always starts at home. I'd like to finish by expressing gratitude. I can't really mention everybody because it's more than half the people in the room, but as general groups, I'd first like to express gratitude to DAI. DAI is, I don't think many people have mentioned the name DAI today. That's the organization for which I work. It's the organization that has implemented Africa Lead with the support of some other organizations as well. many of us, I think, in this room work for DEI, and DEI is going to be continuing to carry the torch forward with the LINK project. I'd like to express gratitude to USAID, the counterparts that we've co-created, worked with collaboratively with. We talked about procurement a little bit earlier. Someone talked about procurement. Technically speaking, we are under a cooperative agreement with USAID that does not require contractually a lot of substantial involvement from USAID in the project, but we have always had an approach to co-creation and collaboration with USAID. It's worked out really well, and that's what we want to continue with. And then last of all, I would like to, most of all, express gratitude to all the folks that came from Africa that really, I think, provided the richness of this discussion today. Without them, this event just wouldn't have been what it has been. And so with that, and before I make one last announcement, I'm going to ask somebody to come up. I don't know if it's Robert or maybe someone else who feels like they've got a new clap that we could share. And because one thing I've really enjoyed living in Africa, and I know, Jeff, you've probably seen them all, but maybe somebody could come up with a clap that maybe you hadn't seen yet. They're great. Who wants to give us that clap so we can all clap for ourselves? Because I think we really are we're really expressing gratitude to every single person in the room. Can we do that? Who's got a clap? How about the silent clap? And does anyone do the silent clap? Come on, Constance. Do I have to shout? Everybody, yeah. You need to stand up for this one. Okay, it's fine. And I'm going to make one last
if I don't deliver the clap the way it should, you pardon me, because I thought I had gotten over the jet lag, but it's getting at me now. So when you want to do this clap, you need to balance well, as in stable your, because if not, it can pull you down. So you would clap as you are motivated. I actually have renamed this clap Rin's clap. Rin, yeah. Rin's clap, Rin. So it has an incentive. So if you feel motivated and you see an incentive to clap, then you listen to me, then you clap like I'm prompting you to. If you feel that African Lead, through their program in Africa, has really delivered on promoting African agriculture to be led by Africans, give me a big... Hello? You listen to me. When I say give me a big, you know what to do. But listen to what I'm saying. I said, if you feel that collaborative governance delivers results and is very effective, give me a B. And I said, if you feel that some of you spent 14 hours with the delays at the airport to come to this place to share your experience, that it was worth the while, give me a resounding. And I say, if you feel that in the past 45 years, if you were born by then, that meeting Jeff Hill has been very, very, very impactful to your life, to your work, to the promotion of agriculture in Africa, give me the very resounding. And I finally say, if you believe that the links, am I correct? Is going to even push harder than the African League too, and that you feel that some of the learnings we've taken out from this is going to add value. Give me a very big, another big, and a final big, and we... And we wrap it up with a love clap. Because in Africa, we are very demonstrative of how we feel.
It's right here.
Yeah. So,
Here.
Godfrey is warming up.
There it is. Right
So
there.
it goes like this. When I say 1, 2, 3, go, you clap.
Okay, you're good? Okay. Oh, thanks. Wow. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Constance. That was wonderful. Okay, just a few announcements. First, there's a lookbook in your folders if you're interested in learning a little bit more about what the project has achieved. Take a look in there. Second, someone has left their glasses, so see me if these are yours. Okay. Third, we're inviting you to a reception just next door through these doors. You'll need to take all of your belongings with you because there is another event in here immediately after we free up this space. About the reception, please pick up drink tickets. So there will be a table at the entrance to that room where we will give you drink tickets. There are drink tickets for alcoholic beverages and drink tickets for non-alcoholic beverages. Once they run out, you're not cut off, but you're on your own. So take your wallet. And there are light appetizers available. Enjoy and have a wonderful evening. Thank you, everyone.